Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, an unimaginable mistake. IDF Staff Sgt. Natan Fitoussi killed by friendly fire Monday night. Meanwhile, Ramallah responding to newly exposed messages in which former President Trump okayed unilateral West Bank annexations, provided that then Prime Minister Netanyahu paved the way for an independent Palestinian state. And finally, designer organs the way Mom used to make. Israeli scientists successfully growing a viable synthetic mouse embryo, and from nothing but the mouse's own skin cells. Our top news tonight, a devastating incident late Monday evening. 20-year-old Staff Sgt. Natan Fitoussi killed by friendly fire near the West Bank city of Tulkarm. The country whipped into a panic overnight as the Israeli Defense Forces report a drive-by shooting attack in which an Israeli soldier was killed, and several units scrambling to catch the perpetrator or perpetrators. But hours after the initial reports, the IDF clarifying that Staff Sgt. Natan Fitoussi was actually killed due to mistaken identity. The Army spokesperson explaining that Fitoussi left his guard post and that, upon return, his fellow soldier did not recognize him, and therefore, despite reportedly following procedures to identify an approaching suspicious individual, Fitoussi was still shot. That said, more details still yet unknown, and investigations are ongoing. Meantime, Fitoussi's family given the heartbreaking news. The 20-year-old soldier who had made Aliyah from France was living in Netanya at the time of his death, and he's been posthumously promoted in rank to staff sergeant. Further, Fitoussi is the third IDF death by friendly fire this year. In January, 2 IDF soldiers from the elite Egoz unit were killed in an accident in the Jordan Valley, and just later that month, 2 border police officers were wounded by friendly fire along the barrier with Egypt. Now, joining me to discuss the overnight friendly fire tragedy is military strategy expert and research fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, Colonel in the Reserves, Professor Gabi Siboni. Thank you so much for joining us, Colonel. What are the IDF policies and procedures for people who are approaching IDF positions? How is the IDF shooter supposed to verify an approaching suspect before jumping to gunfire?
Well, at least let's start with our condolences for the family of the soldier who was killed last night. And you know, when you are working and defending the country 24/7, you cannot have your senses operating in full capacity. So it's difficult. You have to understand that it is very difficult, and it is a very tense situation, and it's not always about the procedures and remembering every not of the procedure. So first, to understand that it is a human thing. It's very difficult to operate in very tense situations. So first, we have to understand that before we dive into the issue of the procedures and how what is the rules of engagement and so on and so forth. Now, in regard to the rules of engagement, in any way, depending on the zone that you operate, there are rules of engagement. You have to understand how to before you open fire. There are some steps you take before you open fire. The assessment and the investigation of what happened last night is still going on, so I don't want to relate to any of it. But you know that it's a tragedy, and 2 friends from the same platoon were separated, and then one of them opened fire on the other. So it still has to be investigated. But things like that, you know, it happened in the past, and probably tragically it will happen in the future as well.
All right. So I mean, as you said, the investigations are still ongoing, but initial results that have been published suggest that the soldier who opened fire followed procedures properly and still shot Staff Sergeant Fitoussi. How does that happen? How do you follow procedure and still have such an outcome like this?
So if this is the case, of course, we have to check the procedures, yes? But I don't believe that this is the case. Well, I really didn't know what I cannot expose, share what I know, but I don't believe that this is the case. We will have to see. There is an investigation, and we'll have to see what happened and what made the shooter shoot, open fire. Probably he felt that he was in danger. I'm sure that he felt he was in danger and responded to his feelings. He was in danger and responded. But anyway, we know, I think everybody knows that normally before you open fire in a friendly zone, it's not in the middle of Lebanon, yes, it's inside Israel. So when you open fire, normally there is a certain procedure you have to follow. You have to vocally address, you have to do some voice alerts to the other side, sometimes also to fire to the air before you fire. But let's see the investigation. I think the investigation will be held very soon and we will know better. But again, I want to tell you something, that it is easy to send, below my fluorescent lights and speak about it. But when you are there at night, and you have you're in full alert and you feel a sense of threat, then it's very difficult to get into from outside. For me, for example, for anyone, to get into the heart of the feelings of the soldier. How was he felt threatened and what he decided to do. So I believe that we have to let the investigators do their job and see what happens.
So first of all, I just want to state that I agree with your premise that we need to wait. We need more information, and it's very easy, of course, to cast judgment without really knowing what it is that they went through. There
are some general aspects that you can drive out of this incident.
So at the same time, though, there was actually something else that disturbed me last night about the event, and that was actually the IDF's reporting of the incident. They sowed panic for essentially no reason. They said that they even had started a manhunt. What are the IDF's policies for releasing information? How is the army so quick to report a terror attack when it wasn't?
Well, I don't want to, this is not my job to comment on the IDF spokesman policy. Of course, I have my personal assessment and how they function. But, as always, if it was my responsibility, I would always wait a little bit and before I release any information. We all remember the incident which is now, being investigated with the police, if you remember, the Qatar incident, saying he was a terrorist, and eventually we found out that he was just an innocent Bedouin. So it is always better to hold your breath a little bit before you respond and get some better information before you respond. It's always good. But I don't know, what were the considerations last night? I really don't.
All right. Colonel Siboni, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
In other news, the EU recently submitting its final draft for a renewed Iran nuclear agreement, saying there won't be any more negotiations in Vienna, and Iran scheduled to give its response by midnight on Monday. So what did Tehran have to say? Well, ILTV's Kayla Eberlin reporting.
Responding to the EU's final draft for a renewed JCPOA nuclear deal, Iran, as relatively expected, giving a non-answer. Or at least, that's how it appears. Originally indicating it would definitively react by midnight Monday, the Ayatollah regime still now suggesting they're ready to conclude the accord, but only if their opinions are accepted. Iran asking for the US's flexibility in resolving three supposedly outstanding issues.
آمریکا این انعطاف و واقع بینی رو نشون بده ما در روزهای آینده به نقطه توافق میرسیم. اگر نشون نده دنیا آخر نخواهد شد.
But details of Iran's specific issues not yet published, and unnamed Western officials saying that they suspect Iran is just looking to continue negotiations, something which the P5+1 have already indicated they're not willing to do.
Now, there's fury in Ramallah this week as the PA is responding to a newly exposed letter sent to former Prime Minister Netanyahu by then U.S. President Donald Trump. In the letter, Trump gave Netanyahu his blessing to annex specific cities across the West Bank as long as he accepted a future independent Palestine in the areas that remain. Former U.S. diplomat and executive director of J Street Israel, Nadav Tamir, with more. Nadav, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so first of all, the PA calls Trump's letter proof of support for Israel's, quote, racist, expansionist, colonialist projects. But while the letter is, surprising, it smacks of the same consistently biased language that is used to delegitimize Israel as this settler colonialist entity that really doesn't have a right to exist. So do you think that that's a fair assessment, given that there were no annexations in the end, and that had there been any, it would have meant implicit acceptance of a future Palestinian state?
Well, are we talking about the letter or about the Palestinian response? Because if you're asking
the Palestinian response.
This Palestinian response, well, the Palestinians are enraged by this, and it makes sense. I mean, to have something that you call a peace plan that the Palestinians are not part of, that you only that is being led by the Israeli ambassador in Washington and the settler ambassador, or that called the U.S. ambassador in Israel, Friedman. I can understand why the Palestinians doesn't see it as a legitimate peace plan. So maybe the rhetoric is parabolic, but I can understand why the Palestinians will be upset by it.
All right, so the letter, it also exposes pretty much the opposite narrative of that which was spelled out in Jared Kushner's White House memoirs. He says that former U.S. Ambassador Friedman gave annexation approval unilaterally and behind the president's back. Is this letter proof that Kushner is a liar, or that he's just not in the know, or that he's ignorant, that Trump doesn't trust anybody?
If I understand correctly the situation, and I'm relying here on Barak Ravid, who really investigated this issue from within and out, what Kushner means is that there was no approval for go ahead and annex. And when Friedman gave Netanyahu the green light, and Netanyahu thought he's just going to get a cabinet approval and he's going to annex, that was not what Trump meant. Trump meant, yeah, as part of a peace plan that I hope that you will accept and that you will show me on the map what's the plan for annexation, then it will come in the future. And Netanyahu took it as okay, first annex, then we'll see what's with the Palestinian state. So I don't think Kushner is lying. I also think that Kushner understood before Trump that the Arab countries are not going to sign on annexation. And that's why he eventually came with the Abrahamic Accords, which was Plan B, to cancel annexation and to have this thing with the UAE. It was an idea, I think, of the very, very talented UAE ambassador in Washington, who gave Kushner this idea that we could also cancel the annexation and get something in return.
I mean, looking back on the chronology of events, do you think that had the Abraham Accords not come about, Netanyahu would have annexed whole swaths of the West Bank? Because at the same time, again, that would have meant implicitly accepting a future Palestinian state. Do you think Netanyahu was really prepared to do that?
Netanyahu, he said also in the Bar Ilan speech that he's for a two-state solution. Netanyahu can say something and don't really mean it. And for him, if he could get the annexation, which is, he thought, imminent, and get the benefits, political benefits for it in the coming elections, and deal with the Trump plans about a Palestinian state and hope that the Palestinians will make it impossible anyhow. So I think what Netanyahu wanted is to get the annexation and worry later about the two-state solution, part of the deal.
All right, so on to another topic. Iran was supposed to reply to the EU's final draft of the JCPOA. Realistically, they're basically stalling again. Do you think that Iran is killing a chance for a deal by trying to extend negotiations, or will the West maybe cave and come back to the table in Vienna?
I think that the West does want an agreement, and I think for good reasons. But I think that eventually their patience will run out. And
have we not passed that point?
No, not yet. As we see, there is still attempts by Qatar to negotiate between the sides, and they're back and forth. So I think they understand that the Iranians will always try to get something in the last minute. Everybody knows this.
Right.
The Iranians are expert in that. But they did achieve the JCPOA, so they know that the Iranians could also sign a deal. It's true that because of the Trump withdrawal, the Iranians are much more suspicious.
Right.
They want much more assurances than before. But I think they will prefer a situation where eventually there is a deal.
I mean, so is it possible that Iran is going to try now to extend or stall negotiations until after November elections in the U.S.?
I don't think they will be able to stall it so long. And I actually think that if Iran wants a deal, it's better have a deal when Biden still has majority in the two houses, because after November, we don't know what's going to happen.
All right, Nadav Tamir, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
September 5th, it's the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Munich Olympics massacre, and it's quickly approaching. A ceremony is scheduled to honor the 11 Israelis from the Olympic delegation who were murdered at the Games by Palestinian terrorists. The families of those victims, however, are boycotting the ceremony, and with me to explain why is widow to murdered Olympic fencing coach Andrei Spitzer and spokesperson for the victims' families, Anki Spitzer. Anki, thank you so much for joining us. Now, first off, you were 26 at the time of your husband's horrific murder. Can you walk us through just a little bit of your experience and how it's shaped the last 5 decades?
Well, it's hard to explain because it is really a via dolorosa for us, a long and lonesome road for 50 years. Because first we have the terrible attack in Munich, where we have severe criticism on the German government, also for the attack and also for the aftermath, because they could have prevented the attack because they got prior warnings. Then they were not able to protect our athletes. And then they did not know how to rescue them. They did not even rescue one. And they rescued 3 Palestinian terrorists, yes. And then, of course, they did not accept the help from Israel, who wanted to help because they had more experience. So they made all the mistakes they could during the attack. And then we have the aftermath. For 20 years, we tried to obtain documents, the ballistic reports, the investigative reports, the forensic reports, and they kept saying to us, the Germans, that they have nothing. I'm originally from Holland, so I'm the neighbor of Germany, and I know that every single detail is being documented by the Germans. So we could not accept that. And then one German citizen, who worked in the archives, he went and stole 80 pages for us, and he said there is much more. And with these 80 pages, we finally, after a fight of months and months, they invited us to come to the archives. And we found there 4,000 files and hundreds of forensic pictures. And that is only a small part because there's a lot of information still hidden until 2047, 25 years from here. I will be long gone by then. I must tell you that the actions of the Germans were horrible. They told me when I went after the attack, when I went back to Germany and asked for information, they said to us, you brought terror on German soil. I said, me? He said, yes, the Israeli delegation. And you are talking about terrorists, they said to me. For us, they are freedom fighters. And this is just a small detail what they did to us. They abused us, they humiliated us, they lied to us. And so after 50 years, we asked the president of Germany for 3 things. And I want to let you know what the 3 things are. And first of all, we asked for a public apology and for taking responsibility for their behavior of those authorities in 72. Secondly, we asked him to open all the archives so that we finally will get to know what was going on and who is responsible. And they agreed to that too. And then we asked for a fair and just compensation after 50 years, So, and here our requests are not met. We have been trying to understand why. They give us some sum, which is totally ridiculous. Even the Israeli president Herzog, when we told him what they are offering us now after 50 years, he said, this is a joke, and I said, not a joke, it is an insult.
So that's my question. What compensation have you been offered? What are you seeking? And more to the point, is any amount of compensation good enough? Because at the end of the day, a compensatory package is putting a price on the 11 Israelis who were murdered.
No, of course not. Our suffering and the suffering especially of the 14 orphans cannot be paid off by money. But I think if you take responsibility, and this is what President Steinmeier from Germany is going to do, responsibility comes with a price, and at least offer an amount according to international standards. The attack in Munich was an international terror attack, and according to international law, there are standards what should be paid. So we are not asking for the moon, but we are asking for a normal amount which has been paid to other international attacks, like in Lockerbie, like in the disco attack in Berlin in '86. And that's all, but they are not willing to do that. And they're trying to buy us off with a sum of 200,000 euros. And they are going to subtract from that even the lawyers and everything.
All right, Anki, thank you so much for joining me again today, and good luck with your battle that is ongoing with the German government.
Thank you.
Moving on, an Israeli scientific breakthrough that will forever change the world of medicine. No egg, no sperm, no womb, no problem. Israeli scientists at the Weizmann Institute of Science in Rehovot for the first time successfully creating a viable synthetic mouse embryo. And they did it with nothing but the mouse's own skin cells. But the researchers ending the gestation around 40% development because producing a living mouse, which effectively would be a clone of the original, was not the point. Rather, the intent of the experiment was to provide proof of concept for the scientists' ultimate goal of getting to lab-grown synthetic human organs. Professor Jacob Hanna, who with this knowledge co-founded the biotech startup Renewal Bio, is projecting that within 5 years we'll be able to take a patient's skin cells, revert them to stem cells in an already developed device, and then within a few weeks produce any needed transplant material that is genetically identical to the original patient. This means no need to search for donors and no risk of rejection. But that's not all. For example, a woman with fertility problems could theoretically have her skin cells turned into synthetic embryos that later produce eggs. And again, this is all within a matter of weeks. And now for all of our viewers with kids in the United States, if you're looking to take charge of your children's education, but you're struggling to find a school that matches your values and your budget, there is help available. ILTV's Emmanuel Kadosh with the details.
Over the last 20 years, there has been a phenomenal growth of the Israeli population in America. Unfortunately, many of the children of these families are assimilating rapidly into the society at large and have no connection to their Jewish heritage. In many cases, Israeli parents not only understand the need to give their children a Jewish education, but are happy to send their children to a Jewish day school. They want their American-born children to have a connection to the Israeli lifestyle of their origins. But for many, Jewish day school education is beyond their means and simply unattainable. And naturally, that is where Chinuch Yehudi comes into play. Founded back in 2016, their main goal is not only offer these children an opportunity to have a Jewish education, but also to help these families make it a reality. Their mission is to make sure that no Jewish or Israeli child is left without the option of a Jewish education, and they're able to do so by using resources like state government scholarships, education grants from Jewish organizations, scholarships from local day schools, and Chinuch Yehudi's tuition assistance program. Take Ruth, for example, a mother of two who was determined to send her kids to Jewish school. Everyone around her laughed in her face, telling her that if she did, her kids would end up becoming ultra-Orthodox and forget about her. She paid no attention to the noise and went ahead to send her kids to get a Jewish education. Her kids are now both proud and successful high-tech developers here in Israel, both enlisted into the IDF, and while they do keep kosher and believe in their religion, they could not be farther from ultra-Orthodox. And Ruth thanks herself every day for sending them to Jewish school. If you or anyone you know are looking to send your children to get a good, high-quality Jewish education in the United States, make sure to check out Chinuch Yehudi's website to get all the details.
Now let's take a look at the weather forecast. The forecast is calling for clear skies across the country, both this evening and tomorrow, with tonight's lows averaging 22 degrees Celsius or 72 Fahrenheit. Then tomorrow, temperatures remaining constant with top temperatures reaching 36 Celsius or 96 Fahrenheit. And that's all for today's news. For more updates from Israel on all of your devices, check out our website, ILTV.tv, and subscribe to our newsletter as well as to our streaming platform, ILTV+. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.